Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here for part two of our discussion on the defense with Jordan Coe of the Ravens Situation Room. Jordan, how you doing?
Good. Happy to be here, Ken. Happy for a big Ravens win.
Oh, always a pleasure. And we've got so many great performances to talk about this game, but you know how it works. Who would you like to talk about first?
You know what? I want to talk about Patrick Queen because I think we're getting back into lightning rod territory around Patrick Queen. I think the Ravens have used him less effectively over the last few weeks. They're asking him to defend slot receivers or tight ends, guys in motion, one-on-one. Teams have always attacked Patrick Queen in space. And I think, I think Queen has played well, but he has just not been put in some of these same situations. He, I think, gets in his own head a little bit. And then when he has plays that aren't to the advantage of the team, starts to play a little bit of hero ball, doesn't stay within the system, over pursues. I think you go back to the year where when Nick Chubb had that big 80-yard touchdown run and Patrick Queen just kind of overran it. You start to see him do a little of those things when he gets in his own head. And so I'd really like to see the Ravens, I think Patrick Queen should be in the A gap 40% of the time. Don't let teams try and isolate him. Make teams counter and decide what they want to do because they think Patrick Queen is going to do something else. Don't keep him in this passive role where other teams can attack him, think that they know what they're going to get from him in coverage, and go after him there. I think that is just not going to be his strength overall to this defense.
Okay, I think I understand what you mean here when you're saying you don't want him to have a coverage responsibility at all. So if he's in the A gap, one of the things they've done with him and Smith very effectively is dropping the player who's at the line of scrimmage into coverage and then bringing up the other guy to add an element of confusing. But they seem to do that They seem to do that a lot and have only one guy at the line of scrimmage as opposed to two. But you're saying you want him rushing the passer more as opposed to in coverage more. Is that what I'm getting from?
Yes, rushing. I definitely think he needs to rush the passer more. I think he's really effective. The Ravens use him really effectively as a pass rusher, and I think at least by eye test. And this is, I don't have any numbers in front of me to back this up, so maybe I'm just off base on it. But it feels as though he's been rushing the passer less in the later parts of the season than he was earlier in the season. I think he's really effective. But even if it's not the case of rushing the passer, you're still making like we were just talking about on the last podcast, you're making the quarterback, the offensive line, and the receiver all get in sync around who they think Patrick Queen is covering. So even if he doesn't rush in that situation, is it going to be Queen? Is it going to be a defensive lineman? Is it going to be Van Noy? Who is it going to be that's going to be dropping in those situations and give him the advantage of that? I think, I talked about this a bit, earlier. I thought the Ravens just were a little too vanilla from time to time. And when the Ravens go into that kind of like core vanilla approach, Patrick Queen is almost exclusively the guy that other teams are trying to find and pick on a pass coverage.
I do completely agree with that part, by the way. In the last 29 times he's been targeted, it had been 27 receptions, by the way. This last game, he gave up 10.9 yards per target. So, that's not what you want. His yards per target for the year are fairly high. Let me give you that if I can. He's got, 49 targets for 396. So he's over 8 yards per target now for the year after this kind of bad game, 8.1. That's not what you want out of your middle linebacker. You want to have a weak side, in his case, a guy who can cover better than that. I'm what's happened in recent weeks with Patrick Queen, to me, the coverage has been something where they might actually be able to correct it in some of the ways you've mentioned by giving him different responsibilities. What's been really bad is the tackling has come back at a bad level. In the last 5 games, he's missed 10 tackles. So he actually put out a tweet after the Cleveland game saying, I need to do better than that BS today, basically. And then he took it down or changed it to some way and said, looking forward, glory to God, that kind of thing. It was one of these things where he for whatever reason, he didn't think that should stay up there. But obviously had a bad game. I don't think it is a contract year. Obviously, every other GM in the league has access to all the film there is on Patrick Queen, and if they're going to make a big investment in him, they're going to want to know. But right now, honestly, Patrick Queen has hurt his value a little bit, and I think we had the discussion on this this week talking about how they're going to rebuild the defense next year, and he's honestly dropped to being about an average inside linebacker in this league right now, which is a long drop from the first half of the season when he's playing a lot better than that.
Yeah, I think he's an X factor for this defense as it continues through the rest of the season.
Yeah, so maybe that's an opportunity for improvement if we want to look at the glasses half
Absolutely.
full. There, as we've seen him, we've seen him at a higher level. Yeah,
scheme and personal. I think there's upside in both.
Yeah. Let's move on. Talk about Odafe Owe a little bit. Just been really happy. We talked a little bit about it in the first half. By the way, go download that if you haven't already. There's a lot of good stuff about the pass rush, comparing this to 2006 from 2023. Even talking a little bit about 2000. Jordan made an excellent point, and definitely is backed up by the numbers about how this is an enormous shift historically. A continental shift in terms of how the Ravens have approached their willingness to give up a little more on the ground to be exceptionally good pass defenders. And they're having their most odd relationship in history. They've actually allowed less yards per pass play than they've allowed per run play for the year. And it's 4.5 per run and 4.2 per pass play. So a lot of good discussion about that in the first one. But Odafe Owe, I think, is obviously part of the Ravens. Some is greater than the parts players, but he is one of the really important parts because he's a guy who certifiably is generating some first pressures and a guy who also is benefiting in terms of being able to clean up. And his one sack was a cleanup, but he also had a bull of Brown that set up Clowney for a cleanup in this game. So he's done a little bit of everything. And I think he led the Ravens in pressures. Let's say as I scored, he had 5. Then he had another that was lost to penalty. And then he had another 3 actually where he flushed the pocket and the quarterback ran. One of them ended up being just a short run. So it was a big defensive win. The other 2, it's at least he flushed the pocket and forced a no pass. So real happy with the play of Odafe.
Yeah, he is. When he's been healthy, he's looked really good this year, and he's the guy that the Ravens needed. It was fun to see him beat Orlando Brown for a sack too.
It was. Orlando Brown looked terrible against him. He used Orlando Brown like a sock puppet in this game, frankly. Odafe Owe, by the way, I don't. What do you think his 5th-year option is going to cost the Ravens? What would you guess right now? Not looking at the number. I know this is a deal thing.
Yeah, whatever the number is what it is, though, right?
It is what it is. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so are you asking me if I would take it without knowing what the number is?
No. I want you to try and guess what the number is for how he's played because there's a performance component to it.
Oh, I don't know. I guess it would probably be 13 million.
Okay, see, I thought that too. I thought, sure, he's a good edge, blah, 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 blah. It's only 7.2 million right now.
Oh, they have to take it.
No brainer. Absolute no brainer. But there is a problem is that if he were to make a Pro Bowl, I believe this year, then he would get up to, I think, 9 million. Now, I don't know if you remember this last year, but Patrick Queen was campaigning to make the Pro Bowl at the end of the year. And he's saying, would really appreciate your Pro Bowl vote, blah, 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 blah. Well, Patrick Queen also didn't have his 5th-year option decided on at that point. They decided this offseason they didn't pick it up. But it's one of those things that I really appreciate the work of Pat Hurst out there, who does a bunch of Pro Bowl voting for the Ravens. She's actually might be hurting the Ravens cap. I hate to say it because Ravens get a lot of surplus Pro Bowlers, and when they're in, then they end up costing you more in cap in the future, in particular in the various performance ways where they might get a 4th-year or 3rd-year performance bump, but also if they make it and then you have to pick up their 5th-year option at a later point. So if anybody is trying to sucker you is a strong word, or advocate for you voting for either Bateman or Owe going this next year, Bateman's not going to be affordable anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But in the case of Owe, if he's elected in as a Pro Bowler, it's actually going to hurt the Ravens by a couple of $1 million of cap.
Well, I'd take the guy that I'd take next here that we're looking at is on the other side. Jadeveon Clowney has just been, tremendous. He's done it all. And we knew that he was a good run defender. We knew he could set the edge. We knew he generated a decent number of pressures that didn't always convert to sacks. But he looks like a slimmer player than he has historically. He looks a half a step faster, I'd say, in terms of what we're getting from him as well. And so I mean, you just can't speak highly enough of what the Ravens are getting from Jadeveon Clowney right now.
Outstanding year he's having. I think he's been a good leader. I think the way things have worked out on the team, he fits perfectly in terms of the get initial pressures, also clean up. He's doing some of both, and it's fantastic. And he should generate a really impressive sack number this year. He's probably going to be very hard to re-sign because of that, I'm afraid. He's not going to be in the vet bargain bin where the Ravens have shown incredible ability to get value, by the way. They've found these edge rushers year after year. I mean, it's part of the Ravens system, it seems like, to find guys there and give them a rebirth, whether it's JPP or Justin Houston or any of the guys they've had, Clowney or Van Noy this year. Just seems like a great way to do it. But I've been super high on what Clowney has done for the team. He's been a pretty good run defender. I don't think that's really been a problem for him, and should have had 3 drive-ending plays in this game. He did have 2, but on one of the 3rd and 5s late in quarter 3, that's when Yasin had the 34-yard DPI when he had a quarterback hit on that play. So that play probably should have just fallen incomplete, but Yasin couldn't help himself and ran through Irvin on the play. Irwin. Oh, my turn, right? To go to the next player?
I think so. Yep.
All right. Let me jump on. Ronald Darby needs attention right away because the guy was targeted 4 times the entire game. So he gave up a little 12-yard completion to Irwin. I always get that wrong. Fairly early in the game, I believe. And then each of the other 3 times he was targeted, he had a pass defense. So to go through these, quarter 3, 11-32, 2nd and 5, step-for-step coverage of Jackson, 30 yards down the left sideline, dislodges it for a PD. Couple plays later is 10:02. It's 3rd and 5. It's not the next play, but it's like the 3rd and 5 after that. He reached around Irwin 4 yards from the line of scrimmage for a drive-ending PD. So he had to get 2 PDs to end the drive there, but he did it, and that was great. And then quarter 3, 2:25, they had a 3rd and 17 play that went to Chase, 37 yards down the left sideline. They both leapt for Chase leapt for the ball, made the catch. It looked like he was probably not going to come down in bounds anyway, but it would have been close, and he might have been able to toe tap somehow with some gymnastics. Ronald Darby did not allow that to occur. He drove him right out of bounds in the air. There's no force-out rules, by the way, in the NFL. It used to be, and I was watching a game from 1970 just the other day, it used to be if you forced a guy out and the contact was made in the field of play, it was a completed pass. And then they had the force-out rule for a long time, where if you got 1 foot in, you still counted as being forced out. And then they changed it to now it's all on the offense to try and get both feet down. They're not going to try and judge force outs anymore. So the defender is highly encouraged to almost carry that offensive player to the sideline if they can.
Yeah, you were watching a game from 1970.
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you what. It was a really cool game that I'd never seen before. I knew about it historically, but I'm going to tell you about it real quickly. The Cowboys beat the Lions in the playoff game that year at the Cotton Bowl. This before they moved into their new stadium, and they beat them 5-0 in the playoffs. Mm. And incredible back and forth game of turnovers, basically. It's ugly as hell. A lot like Super Bowl V, if you've seen that. It was a very, very interesting game to watch. But Greg Landry is a 3rd-year player, and everybody thinks he's going to be the next superstar in the NFL. That also is kind of funny for the Lions. Yeah.
Well, Ronald Darby has been playing tremendous. It's unbelievable how the Ravens have been able to keep their corners healthy. They've had some guys miss some time, but they're rotating these guys. They're using them effectively. Darby was a guy to be excited about. I mean, we've seen the performance of how they played without Humphrey earlier in this year. He's been part of that all the way from the start. So really nice to see that depth, from that secondary perspective overall.
Yeah, really paying off.
I'll flip to Brandon Stevens, who is, still being, and I don't understand this, I don't think, but still is occasionally maligned by some fans or some people that remember Brandon Stevens 2 years ago being very not good, which is fair because he wasn't then, but he's been tremendous. And not only has he been tremendous, I think more importantly, he is the guy that it seems as though opposing offenses are targeting first, right? Like there's a read, if he's one-on-one, that's where they're going to go for whatever the reasons are. The Ravens let Stevens on his own in those situations, and he's held up, and it's been tremendous. The value add that's given to this team, in addition to guys like Darby, Anderson, and we'll probably talk about some of those other guys later. But when you look at them all collectively, just really, really impressive stuff.
Let me throw these numbers out at you for. So the first 8 games, Brandon Stevens had 64 targets against him. I think the league is starting to catch on. The last 3 games, Seattle, Cleveland, Cincinnati, 2, 5, and 4 targets. So way less than 8 targets per game in the last 3 weeks. He is having one hell of a season in terms of most of the important metrics. But I'll give you probably the most important one. He hasn't been penalized, or a couple of the most important ones. He hasn't been penalized since week 4. He's got a 70.8 passer rating against. That bumped up a little bit this week because it was 67, I remember, last week. That's probably the touchdown will do that. And he's got 11.1 missed tackle rate, which is solid for a cornerback. Very few cornerbacks do better than that. So that's a solid rate. But anyway, just having a terrific year, and he's played 98.6% of the snaps. So he's the guy who's, I believe he's played the most snaps on defense of any player, and it would be close between him. I'm going to just look real quickly here. He's played 98.6, Hamilton 95.9, and he got knocked out of one game by ejection, and Queen 97.6 and Smith 97.4. So they're the 4. But Stevens has been the guy, played the most snaps of anybody. Just love what he did to Chase in this game. Yeah. All right, I'll move on. I'll do Marcus Williams really quickly. Much better game, and we talked about this in the first half a little bit. But terrific game of approaching tackles better, not hurting guys, initiating contact. He did actually some wrapping up in this game. He also did a couple times where he dipped his shoulder and tried to assist on a tackle that way. Does not give the appearance of playing completely with one arm, but also is not at a point now where he's completely back as a tackler either. So I'm not going to claim that. But I think you made a great point in the first episode that the Ravens schedule really favors Williams for getting right for the next game after the bye.
Yeah, the Ravens schedule assists the whole team. I mean, their willingness to not take a bye after going to London is going to pay dividends here down the end of this year. They need Stanley to get healthy. Whatever you think of him, they need Marlon Humphrey. They need these guys to get healthy. They need 3 or 4 weeks to play together and get in sync, and then let it roll. But Marcus Williams looked like he was a step back, and if he is a guy that's going to create some of these turnovers, which we have seen in the limited time he's played with the Ravens when he's been healthy, to be able to actually turn the ball over, you're talking about, an embarrassment of riches for this Ravens defense in terms of what they have already and what they could be getting back.
Yep, absolutely. I'm very excited about what he's done. Well, I'll jump in with who do I want to talk about? I want to talk about Tavius Robinson. That's who I want to talk about because he had a really good game. First of all, his first career sack, so that's always worth talking about. It was a good one. Played the run well as well. They've got him now as a kind of a designated base defense guy. So they put in this base package, and unless it's the first play of the game, it's typically Harrison and him at the 2 outside linebacker spots, which is a way to conserve a few snaps per game for Clowney, Owe, and Van Noy. And those add up, by the way, because those guys are all playing a pretty high percentage of snaps otherwise, but probably all playing close to 65% of the snaps, or the highest of them would play 65% of the snaps otherwise. So you want to find some way to get those guys some snaps off.
Yeah, absolutely. He's looked really good. They need the outside linebacker rotations. If Jabo and Bowser aren't coming back, it's really nice to see this development from a rookie outside linebacker too. Not surprising that the Ravens were able to do that, but if he could continue on this growth scale, I mean, he's ahead of, in my opinion, where Malik Harrison was at the same stage in his career, and that's really nice.
Yeah, I think he's ahead of that. Maybe Jalen Ferguson would be another guy he's ahead of developmentally, who never before, obviously, his death never really had gotten all the way to being a particularly great pass rusher. I'm trying to think of who else like fits the mold here. He was drafted in a similar round to a Matthew Judon. I don't think I could quite put him in that on that developmental curve yet. Though it's hard for me to remember exactly where Judon was as a rookie. And I know with Tyus Bowser, there were all kinds of complaints about him as a rookie, not being another second round bust, that was garbage. Silly. But I was really concerned that there's not a ball player here. Now I think there's a decent rotational player here. And we'll see if he can develop into a guy who can kick inside and take some defensive line snaps off the rest of the team, because that would be a nice advantage. If you get a little bit of pass rush from him, then maybe he can take a few of those snaps on the inside.
Absolutely. The last guy I wanted to talk about, there's some other names, but really give some attention to Kyle Hamilton too. Mm-hmm. What he's doing for this team, he's clearly a Pro Bowler this year. I think unquestionably probably an All-Pro. That pick against Deshaun Watson might have put it over the top for him. Just playing tremendously well. Talk about a Swiss Army knife. Can use him 100 different ways. Complete threat, shutting down tight ends, slot receivers, being a pass rusher, sacks, interceptions, touchdowns. What a great draft pick.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic pick, and I love Kyle Hamilton like nobody's business. But he had 2 missed tackles in this game, and he had an illegal hands to the face penalty that I think tacked on 5 yards, kind of near the goal line on a play. So it wasn't even his best game, and yet he's still all over the field making plays. He had a drive-ending PD in the game. Just a lot to like about him. He's still huge presence as a pass rusher, and in fact, on the play where Stone came down and caused the alligator arming, maybe it wasn't, or maybe it was, for Jamar Chase. He is actually abandoning the slot position, and Jamar was out looking as the slot, trying to look for that wide receiver screen, and then Stone comes screeching downhill on him. But it's also Hamilton getting pressure, which caused that ball potentially to be thrown a little high in that situation. So, he's a looming figure there in terms of what he can do. And obviously the Cleveland Browns found that out in Deshaun Watson just this last week with a beautifully schemed up interception. I mean, that wasn't just a schemed up pass rush. That was schemed up for an interception as it was run.
Yeah. He's just been, what he adds to this defense has been tremendous. And again, you see the Ravens do look a little tired. We've seen more missed tackles. You mentioned that from Kyle Hamilton's part. It's not just him. This upcoming rest, I think, is going to reinvigorate the defense a bit too.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Okay, why don't we go to the mailbag here, answer a couple of questions, and then do you want to put together your list of MVPs 3, 2, 1, and while I go to the mailbag and hit a question, and then we'll call it a little early tonight. And okay, let's see. So we have one from Jeff B. Now, Jeff B asks a lot of great questions. He says, Marcus Williams played every snap in the first half. His lack of tackling ability has shown up despite a nice play on the football on 3rd down. If Burrow does not return, we may see Worley for a good portion of half 2. It seems to have written this one pretty much directly during the game at 9:00 last night. And then 10 hours ago, he says, I saw a post that he got the highest grade on PFF for the Ravens defense. Would like to hear your thoughts on that for the defense show. I think we kind of covered that already, Jeff. I really appreciate the question. But Marcus looked a lot better tackling. Not 100% of the time was he looking like he could tackle like Marcus Williams. You expect a safety to tackle and wrap up and whatnot, but he had plays where he wrapped up. Whereas against Cleveland, he had no plays where he wrapped up. Every single play was a shoulder tackle, a one-arm grab, or a try to herd the player out of bounds without making contact, which those are the ones that I think he'd really hurt a team that played very heavy against the Ravens, that played with Ford as a running back who was, not afraid of contact in any way, shape, or form, and with Njoku at tight end who was getting some screen passes that were causing problems as well. Not to mention, anytime a receiver gets a catch between level 2 and level 3, Marcus Williams has to make a tackle. Anything to add to that? I'm sorry.
No, I think that's right. But I think he's just got it's a question of him getting healthy, and it's a question of the Ravens cutting some responsibility loose back to him, and it's only going to make the team better. So this is a straight health question for Marcus Williams, and so you want to keep seeing him improve in that regard. And I think he's one of those guys where if he needs extra time to get healthy, I feel the same way about Humphrey and Stanley. Don't rush them back. They need these guys to. You need game breakers to win big games in the playoffs and to make big plays in big moments. Let these guys get healthy and bring them back. I'm not going to fret over him being hurt in week 10, week 9, week 8. If that means that we can have him healthy when the playoffs roll around. And
credibly, the Ravens have just finished week 11, which tells you, we're getting old and the season's going quickly. So, I got another question here from Jesse Niederberger, so I'll give you this one to you. Were the Ravens playing soft against the run in an effort to slow down the pass against Joe Burrow, or were they being dominated up front? The run D seemed to improve once Joe left the game.
I think they were just playing soft against the run in general. I don't, and yes, sure. The counter to that is that it is to slow down the passing offense, but the Ravens have just light boxes. We talked about this a little bit already. A lot more light boxes, a lot less heavy personnel, a lot more interest in having guys that are going to be able to sack the quarterback or be part of a sequence of how they can get after the quarterback rather than stopping the run. So I think that Cincinnati's approach was to show pass and use Mixon a bit to effectiveness. So it's kind of like a combination. And then once Burrow came out of the game, not only does that take his ability out, it also takes the packages and plays and things that you've designed out of the game and potentially out of play as well. So it's not just Joe Burrow exclusive. It's when your quarterback goes down, the whole approach for everything that you practice all week long has to change. And I think that help the Ravens look better in terms of run defense too.
Yeah, I think maybe if I were to add one thing, and I think you basically nailed it here, that against Joe Burrow, the last 4 or 5 times they've played him, they've been very effective at forcing him to play small ball. And Joe Burrow does not have the kind of arm strength to really challenge a too deep defense when they stay in too deep. Now, the Ravens don't always stay that way. They often rotate into single high, but they start with too deep typically. And when you do that and you're keeping eyes on the quarterback, you just present a lot of problems for a quarterback like Burrow with very average arm strength. And the first time around, he wasn't really able to step into his throws because of the calf. This time around, it sounded like didn't really have the good grip on the football to throw the ball effectively. So forcing him to play small ball was probably a very good thing. And I think the Ravens, clearly made it work. Michael Cabot says, thoughts on getting JAD reps over Yasin? It was, yes, it was late in the game, but Yasin is having a rough couple of games lately.
Yeah, he's not looked quite as sharp, but you know what? I don't think there are in-game developmental snaps that are needed. I think that you've got, once Humphrey comes back, then with Millette and Darby and Stevens and Humphrey, Yasin is just the last guy in the rotation to be.
Yeah. That's where I am right now.
I just don't think there's a lot developmentally there to gain.
Yeah, I would agree too. I think JAD right now, getting towards the end of his second year, the Ravens do kind of need to figure out what they have, and it'd be another good reason to have kind of a artificial bye week in Week 18. If that Steelers game doesn't mean anything, then you can have JAD out there, and you can give him a chance to try and see what you have anyway. And I think that would be good. One more question, then we'll be done. Thoughts on Washington being inactive? More so scheme against Cincinnati or performance? Also, percentage of defensive signing happens over both buys. Okay, so I'll take the first part of this. In terms of Washington, I think it was actually a surprise inactive, and I'm really worried about what the injury might be. I'm hoping it was just an illness, but I don't think there's any way in hell they'd have played only 4 defensive linemen in a game against Cincinnati by choice.
I agree. He's played more than well enough this year. He's been great for the draft pick, the value, his role in the team. He's a guy that the Ravens need moving forward, and let's just hope that it's not some other big picture injury problem.
Yeah, I think the other thing about a percentage chance of a defensive signing over both buys, 40%, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a defensive line signing. So, it could be a defensive backfield. It could be any number of a variety of positions. It could be a signing to the practice squad. In terms of a guy being like immediately elevated, probably less than that. Anything to
I think that they're looking at whether Ndamukong Suh is the guy that they want to bring in. I mean, there's smoke there. Is there fire? I mean, do they need it? Right? He's the right. If we're talking about a guy that fits this new scheme that is not defensive tackle, that is run stop centric, then he's the perfect fit. Sounds like he wants to play. Sounds like he didn't want to put his whole body through the full rigor of a team or the full rigor of an NFL season. Not like. I mean, it's basically now is the time. And, you know, do the Ravens want to continue to kick the can on their cap? You know, they continue to say, this is our year. We're going to go after it. This will be I think that's more realistically, performance is not the issue. Cap, but future cap, I think, is the issue.
Right. It's $400,000 is all they have to pay for the portion of the season they could be getting from Ndamukong Suh. So I think it's an easy enough one to make work if they want to do it. So I'd be all for it, by the way. I think he fits the need right on the money. Tell you what, let's finish it up and name our MVPs 3, 2, 1. Who's your number 3 guy?
So my number 3 guy was Odafe Oweh, who I thought just played from an edge perspective, just had a phenomenal game and the kind of performance the Ravens are going to continue to need to see.
Couldn't argue with that. Even at least he's on my honorable mention list. It is a long honorable mention list this week. My number 3 guy is Marcus Williams. Came back, couple passes defense. That was really nice. Tackling like he could be ready to go again. The one pass defense ended a drive. He did enough in this game that I'm not only excited about what he accomplished for the Ravens, but I'm very excited about how good he could be for the rest of the year. So important we all not become wedded to a position. I thought Worley was the guy who should be out there last week. I thought probably it meant Worley should be the guy who should be out here this week, but Williams proved me wrong in terms of he was up to the tackling challenge enough that I think they were better off with him than with Worley.
Yeah. I thought he played really well and was, again, he's going to be a big part of this team if we're talking about a kind of like deep playoff run. So really excited to see. You know, my number 2 guy was Brandon Stephens. I think that he like we've talked about a lot already. He's just an anchor right now to the secondary. Teams are approaching how they treat him differently. His performance has not dropped. Just especially with Humphrey being a guy that's been banged up, just really, really A+ performance for Brandon Stephens.
Yeah, I'm right on there, and he's my number 2 guy as well. I guess I'll just toss out the question since I think we've talked about him enough. Is the end of the season he becomes eligible to be extended after 3 years? By the way, there's always some idiot who tries to say that there's already negotiations going on about this kind of stuff. There's not supposed to be. So, or if somebody's refused an offer already, then you know it's a pile of crap because there can't be an offer yet. Stephens, though, what kind of number would represent a reasonable divisible benefit to extend him for, say, 4 years? If you wanted to add years, probably years, maybe 3, extend 3 years, extend years 5 through 7 onto his contract, and he plays next year for whatever his contract is signed for, which is still his original deal as a 3rd-round pick.
You know, I'd have to look more closely to throw a specific number on it, but I would say something in the realm of like what Tyus Bowser got. Mm-hmm. You know, you're talking about a nice chunk that's going to be good for the player, but also going to leave some upside for the team.
Right. And that's where I say there has to be divisible benefit on the team. So I don't think Brandon Stephens jumps immediately to $10 million a year. I think $7 to $8 million a year is reasonable to have some divisible benefit. And I think you put a fairly steep slope on that. So there's a good amount of money up front, but it's not a tremendous amount. And then there's a steep set of salaries. But the key thing is that the money up front is going to be what Brandon Stephens is really interested in, because that's what he should be willing to give up for. That is the security he gets. So that's why players generally only care about the guaranteed money in contracts. So if 10 million of that is guaranteed of, say, 21, I'd be fine with that. Number 1 guy.
My number 1 guy is Jadeveon Clowney. I think that what he brought at the edge, the sacks, the game, or the drive-ending plays that you talked about, it just continues to be a leader across the board. And just the Ravens defense would not be the same without him this year. Wouldn't have been the same in this game.
Completely agree, by the way. And this one week, and I'm guilty probably of going away from some of the edge rushers and Matabike who have dominated these lists all year. But I'm going with Ronald Darby in this game with the 3 PDs, 2 drive enders, contributed to the demise of Chase in this game, which I thought was good. I just thought his performance was outstanding, and they were absolutely fantastic when he was in the game. And not as good nearly when Yasin was in. So he's my number 1 guy this week.
Yeah, like you said, there are a lot of guys that could have been right there this year.
Yeah. All right, always a pleasure to talk football with you, my friend. Tell folks where they can talk to you online or definitely listen to the Situation Room.
Yeah, you can find us on Twitter. Me and my co-host Gabe Ferguson. I'm at Raven Sit Room. He's at Gabe Fergie, trying to get some quick, one-off reactions to some of these games, do some hot takes a little bit, and then come back to them later in the week, and kind of take a look at breaking down how things are looking. So we'd love to hear you or have you join us on the podcast, but we'd also love to hear from you on Twitter.
Outstanding analysts here, both Gabe and Jordan, very smart people. It's obviously clear from the way they talk and respond and talk about football, but also these guys have been fantastic about coming on the show very regularly and being a great guest in front of the show. Really have appreciated that, and that's why it's one of the shows I always look forward to is getting to talk with you, or for that matter, with Gabe as well. And so the Situation Room, I highly recommend to people who are looking for that next pod to listen to. Other folks out there, I'm going to ask you for one thing this week. You guys know how to reach me on a short, so I won't go over that again. But if you wouldn't mind, like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Write a comment if you want. I'll try and respond to those out there. And also, if you would, and you're a longtime listener, full of loyalty, wondering what you can do for the show, writing a review always helps. So if you have a 5-star review you wouldn't mind giving to us on one of the podcast platforms, that'd be fantastic. And they all get looked at, and then that becomes part of the search engine algorithm and whatnot. It helps us get additional eyes on the pod. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for being wonderful listeners, incredible loyal audience. Jordan, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me as usual, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.